We got quite the birthday today.
That's right. From coolmathgames.com, it's Mathman. That's right. The cool Wait a second. Mathman. Oh, this is my script from abc123.com. Sorry.
It's easy as do
Wrong
re mi.
script.
But anyways,
Yeah, let me just get the script.
can I just say real quickly that Cool Math was only designed so students can play games in school? Because there were barely any
It
math
works.
games. It worked. Teachers never batted an eye to it, and that's why it was great. Never was blocked. Kids could play games. Oh, those were the good old days. But speaking of the good old days, this doesn't mark the anniversary of Mathman, but instead the direct inspiration, Pac-Man. Today marks his 40th anniversary, which is just incredible. Hearing those two numbers together is unbelievable. 20 I could get past. 30 I could get past. But 40? We're only 10 years away from 50, and that's very, very long time for a game. Because gaming is still relatively new if
Yeah,
you think about it.
it is. And Pac-Man's been through a lot these past 40 years. Through a lot of experimentation and revivals and just being himself sometimes too. Um, it's nice to know that the little yellow guy is still around.
I mean, if you were Pac-Man, would that be such a bad life? You just spend all day eating, avoiding ghosts, and you have Miss Pac-Man for a wife.
Uh, yeah.
Sounds like a pretty good life to me. But anyways, this isn't going to be a traditional discussion because there's going to be some light predictions towards the end of stuff they could do for the 40th anniversary and stuff we got right from the first discussion we had earlier this year. But this is really just going to be our memories with the Pac-Man series in honor of his 40th birthday. So, with Pac-Man, I think Namco did an excellent job making it relevant to all generations because there are some stuff from the 80s that generations nowadays, or even my generation, would never really get. There are some arcade games like Joust that were popular back then, but they never really made the impact that Pac-Man did. And there are many ways he stayed relevant. But I want to talk about my memories with the series, you're going to talk about your memories, and just the fun times we had with it.
Right on. Let's get started.
So I'll start off because I feel like our experience with Pac-Man was very similar towards the beginning. Back in 2005, it was, I think, Christmas. My dad got this Pac-Man plug and play that had 5 different games on it. I can't remember all of them. I definitely know that Galaxian, Bosconian, and Rally X were some of the games included. It's hard to remember what the fifth one was. But Pac-Man was of course included, and I had so much fun playing it. Back then I didn't have any game systems, so I had this plug and play with Pac-Man and a few other games on it, and I had so much fun with it. So much fun to the point that it actually died out and I had to get another one. Now that new one I got, I think that was the one you actually had. It had more games on it. It had Super Pac-Man and Pac-and-Pel. I think it even had Galaga, and that one was a lot of
Yeah, it
fun.
did.
It had more games. It was really nice to control too. Those Jack specific plug and plays were very well made. And
Oh,
then
they
I
were
got the Miss
fantastic.
Pac-Man one. So that was my history with the plug and plays and how it introduced me to not just Pac-Man but gaming because that was the first video game I ever played.
Yeah. So I had a similar experience to my exposure to Pac-Man. I don't quite remember exactly how I got introduced to the character. Um, there's two early memories of me being at a Rite Aid, or for you old folks out there, when it used to be called Eckerd's. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but
I certainly do.
um, yeah. So real old school. Um, Either I got it from an Eckerd's a long time ago, or the other earliest memory I have is being at an airport, waiting to go home, and on my way home there was a Miss Pac-Man machine, I think with Galaga. Um, and I didn't, I don't even think I had quarters on me. I thought I was playing the game, that's how engaged I was with playing the game. But yeah, those are my two earliest memories with Pac-Man. And then of course the plug and play. I was obsessed with it every time I came home from school. My mom would let me play 20 minutes before I did my homework of Pac-Man, the plug and play. And this version had Pac-Man, Super Pac-Man, Pac and Pal, Mappy, Galaga, New Rally X. Oh man, I really wish I still had it. Those that was that was really great. The Jack specific plug and play games were just so great, and it's such a big part of my childhood. But um, yeah, I remember also I was so obsessed with Pac-Man that I remember that same year I found out there was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon of Pac-Man from the 80s, and I kept begging my dad to get the DVD box set for me, seasons one and season two. Um, but at the time it was so expensive, so we didn't. I don't think we got it, but I just remember me like being like so obsessed over Pac-Man that I wanted to watch the old cartoon. I wanted to play the other games, right?
Right.
Um, and there's another story that I have connected to this, which I think I'll mention a little bit later. But yeah, my introduction to Pac-Man was mainly through that little airport thing and the plug and play games. So yeah.
Weren't those the good old days when arcades were at airports? I don't think that exists anymore for the most part.
They don't. And for a while, I thought that maybe it was just a dream I had that there was an arcade machine in the airport. But a lot of my friends from back in the day told me the same thing. So I don't think I think that's an actual memory that I have. It's very fuzzy, but I do remember playing it, and it was great. Um, but yeah, I've had a long history with Pac-Man ever since I was like first or second grade, I think.
I think that was around the time where I got into Pac-Man. Actually, maybe kindergarten. And it's good you brought up the Miss Pac-Man and Galaga machine because those arcade machines are still very common to find. And I played a lot of those. They had them at movie theaters, they had them at a lot of arcades. And whenever I got the chance to play Pac-Man in the arcades, I always would. It was never Pac-Man though, it was Miss Pac-Man. And I like Miss Pac-Man even better. That wasn't on the plug and play, but I did manage to find one that did include it. And what's interesting about these plug and plays is that versions of Miss Pac-Man and all the other arcade games, I believe were made specifically for them. They play identical to the arcade ones. I looked, they sound the same. So this was
Hmm.
really good. This was back in 2004, I believe. But a lot of plug and plays nowadays are including NES versions of the game, which they don't hold a candle to the originals.
Oh, that
But if Jack
sucks. Yeah.
Specific would bring back the plug and play concept and make them HD, that'd be great. But I do remember playing Miss Pac-Man in the arcades, and that was the one I liked the most. In fact, talking about arcade games and Miss Pac-Man and stuff like that, I do remember a close family friend of mine at his birthday party. He got a Miss Pac-Man machine. His daughter was my friend back in elementary school, I believe. And during that entire party, I played the heck out of the Pac-Man machine. It was so much fun. Eventually, though, it broke, but they ended up getting
Oh
this.
man.
It looked kind of like a UFO. It was a smaller arcade cabinet, but it had Miss Pac-Man, Galaga, and Frogger. It was one of those multicade boards. So I was thinking, why only
Oh,
those three
interesting.
games when you could have all the 60 games that those multicades include? But talking about Pac-Man in the arcades, it wasn't until 2011 where I got to actually play an original Pac-Man machine. Now this was back when Disney Quest was
Mm.
still around, and I just want to say I miss Disney Quest so much. It was so cool. Man, if they just updated Disney Quest by adding more VR attractions, it would still be around, but they had included that NBA thing instead that took its place, which was so stupid, but I could talk about Disney Quest all day. But I played a majority of the Pac-Man games in the actual arcade, and it's really cool because a lot of them are very hard to find. So, with the original Pac-Man, it was actually more common to find a Miss Pac-Man machine, but I can see why because Miss Pac-Man's so much better. But I also was able to play Junior Pac-Man, Super Pac-Man, and even Baby Pac-Man, which I was very surprised to find. So talking about those arcade games, Super Pac-Man was the only official sequel that was released in North America. Some people played it. My uncle, who was growing up in the 80s, definitely mentioned that they had Super Pac-Man at the arcade he went to. But it didn't catch on like Miss Pac-Man and Pac-Man did, because people just loved that addicting gameplay that the first two games had. Super Pac-Man was very fun, just a little more slow paced. But then there was Junior Pac-Man in 1983, and the mazes scrolled. They were a lot bigger, but I preferred Miss Pac-Man and Pac-Man over it because I didn't like the scrolling. The mazes were a little bit too big, but it was still fun. And then Baby Pac-Man was the pinball arcade game hybrid, which was very cool. If anything, it's fun to play for the novelty of it. But have you played any of the other Pac-Man games in the arcade?
I think for the most part, it was just Ms. Pac. A lot of the arcades near me um,
So it was
weren't
just Miss Pac-Man?
Pac-Man heavy. They didn't have any of the original Pac-Man arcade machines.
Now the thing is,
Yeah, basically. Um, yeah,
unless you
go on.
went to an arcade that had a ton of retro games like Disney Quest, or a lot of arcades are emerging nowadays which include retro games, so they're much easier to find than they were back in
Right.
the 2000s where most arcades just included, racing games, claw machines, stuff like that. A lot of
Right.
the Pac-Man stuff in the arcade you'd find were those machines, the class of 1981 that had Miss Pac-Man and Galaga, which Pac-Man, it was actually there, you just had to input a code on it. But they did have ones in
Right.
2005 which included Pac-Man, Galaga, and Miss Pac-Man right from the start. I've seen a few of those. I've definitely seen them out there, but I've seen more of the class of 1981 ones.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen all the versions of the arcade Ms. Pac-Mans throughout my lifetime. I'm not really sure which one I started with, but you know, for the most part, most of my arcade Pac-Man experiences has been with Miss Pac-Man. And to touch up you were talking about Super Pac-Man being the true sequel to the original game. I remember I was so fascinated with Pac-Man that I actually went online, and I don't know if you remember this, but they had like this G4 TV documentary on the history of Pac-Man, and I would watch that. I wouldn't watch that just once. I watched it like for like a couple of times in a row. I think I watched it like almost every day for a while. Um, and it talked about how Bally Midway was the North American distributor. It introduced me to the video game crash of 1983. It talked about how big Pac-Man was back in the 80s, all the merchandise that emerged from that. I saw all the old Pac-Man commercials from the 80s. I knew about Pac-Man cereal. It was just like learning. I feel like Pac-Man was also my introduction to the world of video games too, and the history of video games. And as someone who knows a lot about the history of video games nowadays, I owe that a lot to, um, you know, my fascination with the series from a long time ago.
Yeah, I would say that too because I got the plug and plays and started playing Pac-Man years before I got an actual game system. I think I played Mario 5 years after I got into Pac-Man, so if it weren't for Pac-Man, I really wouldn't have any interest in gaming. So that was really good. The machines were great to play on. The plug and plays were great because you could play them at home. And really, Namco did a great job introducing the Pac-Man series to a whole new generation. So I applaud them for that. And I really applaud Pac-Man for getting me into gaming. Now, going on to other
Same.
things that Pac-Man did, we covered the arcade games quite a bit, but the console games were also very good. Namco has done an excellent job preserving most of the arcade games. They don't include the Bally Midway unlicensed games, except for Pac-Man Plus, which I found kind of weird. But needless to
It's odd.
say, they've done great preserving the games. So this leads me into the next one, Namco Museum. Now, did you play any of the Namco Museum games? Because we're going to touch on this for a little bit because we talked about the plug and plays, but that was also a great way to play Pac-Man, and I had some of the fondest memories with those games.
So my introduction to the Namco Museum series was with Namco Museum Remix on the Wii, which wasn't it. In hindsight, looking back at the other Namco Museum games, it's not the best collection of games you could get for Namco games,
Yeah,
but
definitely.
it was very special. It was very special though because it did have a remake of a very I'd say not obscure but niche Pac-Man title called Pac-and Roll, which the original DS game had you touching Pac-Man on the bottom screen to roll him across the stage. Um, Really interesting Pac-Man game. And I remember I was so obsessed with that game back in the day that I was at my friend's house, and I remember I played it for like 2 hours straight, sweating bullets. And my friend was like, "Dude, are you gonna eat your dinner or no?" I was just I was just so obsessed with it that I just kind of forgot all about eating. Um, but yeah, I mean, as far as Namco Museum goes, that was my first exposure to it. I'm not sure what yours is though.
That was definitely one of them. But my first exposure to it was Namco Museum DS. No, it was a collection of 10 games. It had Pac-Man, it had Galaxian, Xevious, Galaga. It had Dig Dug 2 instead of the first one, which I found a little bit odd. But it was a great collection of games. Definitely good because back then, not everyone had a smartphone, especially if you were kids. That was pretty much unheard of. It was really only for the rich or people who just wanted to have a smartphone. It wasn't like it was today where everyone had them. So if Namco put that on the DS or they put it on the DS, it really introduced the new generation for all those games or to all those games. And looking back at it,
Right.
the emulation wasn't the best because nowadays with a lot of collections of classic games, the emulation's much better. The aspect ratio wasn't quite there, and it just looked a little bit
Mm.
stretched out. But it still played fine. It was really good, and I have fond memories playing it. Actually, before New Super Mario Brothers, that was the DS game that I played the most, I would say.
Yeah, I would kind of love if I recently I feel like Namco's gotten kind of lazy with the Namco Museum games. I would kind of love it's a totally different franchise, but what Christian Whitehead did with the Sonic 1 and 2 and CD remakes, kind of make them from the ground up, but still preserve, what made them the games and kind of re-release them. That would be kind of cool for the classic games because I'm not sure to what extent you could, you know, make them widescreen with the original code that you have. You know what I mean? So I think it would be really cool if later on they got some development studio to remake the games from the ground up for modern consoles while still, having it be the original game.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Pac-Man, I'm not sure would really work in widescreen. I mean, it could, but I think it's better with the vertical display. But another thing I found out about Namco Museum DS, I just remembered this, is that it included Pac-Man Versus, which was on the GameCube. And I had so much fun
Mm.
playing that whenever my family would go on vacation, we'd play it on the DS with the download play, and it was great.
I still have never played that game before. I know it's on the Switch now, but I don't know. That Namco Museum on the Switch is kind of lacking. I don't know if I want to pay for that right now, but I will play it eventually. I know that Mario is the announcer in that game, and that Miyamoto worked on it. And Miyamoto's another fellow Pac-Man fan, so that's
Yeah,
really interesting.
in fact, his favorite character isn't Mario, it's Pac-Man. That's one of my favorite quotes he
That's
said.
and that's why he got into Smash actually, because he actually asked Sakurai during the Brawl days if he could put the original design of Pac-Man in the game. While he didn't get into Brawl, Namco was brought on for Smash 4, and the opportunity was there, and our boys in Smash.
I gotta say, out of all the Smash reveals, Pac-Man was easily the one I was the most excited for.
Oh yeah, that was amazing. I remember that the day it happened, I was in my class in the eighth grade, and I think you actually texted me
Yeah,
the
was that
picture.
long
You were
ago?
like, yeah. Oh my God, we go back way back.
Yeah.
Uh, so you texted me and you were like, dude, I don't know how to tell you this, but Pac-Man is in Smash. I'm like, you're joking. And then you sent me the image of him fighting with everybody. And you were like, nope. And I said, oh my God, in my class, and everyone looked like at me like I was a crazy person. And I told my friend AJ, I was like, dude, Pac-Man is in Smash. And he's just kind of like, okay, I thought he was in Smash already. So obviously you and I were the only ones who were really excited for this, but um, that was a huge moment. And it also goes to show us that we've been friends for that long. Like I just remembered that. I can't believe that
Yeah,
we've been friends for since like what? That was like 2014.
Mario Kart 8. And
Yeah, that
speaking of
was
Mario Kart,
wow.
I know this is kind of random to bring up, but another good memory I have with Pac-Man is there are Mario Kart arcade games out there that have Pac-Man characters playable. Now, it's really cool to see them in there because Mario Kart hasn't had third-party characters except in these games, and Namco actually developed them. So if you've never played the Mario Kart arcade games, they're definitely worth a shot next time the arcades are open. I'm sure they're not open now considering the circumstances, but they're very fun to play, very unique, and it's awesome seeing Pac-Man characters in Mario Kart. Let's bring them into Mario Kart 9, Nintendo.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd love to play as Pac-Man in those games. Speaking of though, I did want to just bring this up before I forget, but I remember, I think it was 2005. Yeah, it was 2005. And I remember the hype for Pac-Man World 3. Um, I had never played any of the Pac-Man World games. I just knew about the arcade games that I played with my Jack Specific thing. And then all of a sudden on YouTube, I see a trailer for Pac-Man World 3, and I looked at it. I was like, oh my God, this is like next level Pac-Man. This is awesome. So every single day up until the release of the game, I would be on the game's website, looking at the images, rewatching all the videos, just waiting for the game to come out. And I remember my birthday came around, and it was the day before my birthday actually, and my parents had the game, and they were like, if you could find it, you could have it early. And I'll be honest, I was kind of peeking my eye through the room to see where they put it, so just so I could play it early. I found it, and I had the game, and my family was all over. And what I did was I was so excited to play the game and to show it off to people. I thought it was like the greatest thing in the world that I literally had my CRTV in front of all my family members, and I played the game in front of them. None of them really cared, but I was just like so enthralled with the game.
And that brings up a good topic because I was going to mention the Pac-Man World games. There were other Pac-Man games I played, such as Namco Museum Remix, which I think you touched on better than I did. It was kind of a weird collection, but the remakes were cool. Pac-Pix on the DS was also really fun, took advantage of the stylus. But I would say the
Yeah.
Pac-Man World games are some of the best in the series because they might not be the most original 3D platformers out there, but they take the Pac-Man gameplay, introduce it into a 3D platformer, and it feels really fun to play. It works great.
Yeah.
I've played all three of them. I would say the first one, it's a little bit more linear than the second one, but I've had the most fun playing that. It feels the most original, but I really like Pac-Man World 2, and even 3 to an extent. I know some people are kind of iffy on the game because of how different it is and how Pac-Man talks. Some people don't like that, but I like the combat system. Pac-Man has boxing gloves to begin with, so it's good he's finally punching and using them. And beat 'em ups are just fun in general. But talking about Pac-Man World, I'm gonna go over the games a little bit. So I would say that it was a great way to celebrate Pac-Man's 20th anniversary, and oh my gosh, Pac-Man World is 20 this year. That's insane to believe.
That's crazy.
So
Yeah.
it was a full-on 3D platformer. It was linear, so it was kind of like Crash Bandicoot. And it took inspiration from that and Donkey Kong Country, but it still was its own thing and
Right.
it's a lot of fun to play. Then Pac-Man World 2 came out, expansion of the first game, another fun game, and then Pac-Man World 3, which is different, but still fun in its own right. Now, what I'd like to see is this is where we kind of get into the predictions or stuff we want to see. I would love to see either
Mm,
Pac-Man World 4 or a remake of the first three games.
mm. So here's my stance on that. I don't think we'll get a Pac-Man World 4 anytime soon. However, like you said, Pac-Man World is turning 20 years old this year. Um, and there has been a demand for remakes of these games. Who's to say? Um, I First off, I think Pac-Man World 3 is too controversial of a game to be remade.
Well, I
I
think
don't think
because it
it's
is, that makes it even better
well.
to remake.
I don't know. I just don't see Namco wanting to put effort into remaking that game. It's kind of the black sheep out of the three games that they have there. So my idea actually is to still remake three games from that era, but replace World 3 with another game that's a little bit more well beloved. So it
I
would be
think I know what it
Pac-Man
is.
World. Yeah, it would be Pac-Man World, Pac-Man World 2, and then another classic, Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness. Those three games are the three games that you think about when it's early 2000s Pac-Man. Like at least quality. I know people have a nostalgia for World 3. I do too, but I think we have to look at the game compared to the previous predecessors. Um, that game is very rushed. The combat system does get repetitive after a while. You just kind of started the game, so I don't know if you're like far enough to realize what I'm talking about, but um, the game isn't bad. It's just not as good as the other games, and I just don't know if a remake could fix all the problems that game has. I think what Namco should do is look at the games that worked, look at the games that really sold well, which are the first Pac-Man World games and Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness, then build off of that. If the fans really want a Pac-Man World 3 remake, then you do it then. But I think they need to stay safe because um, Pac-Man, while he's an icon, um, he's kind of a gamble right now because of dumb decisions they made a few years prior.
Hmm. It's a good thing to bring that up, but I disagree with you there that they're including Maze Madness instead of World 3. Because if they're gonna do a Pac-Man World remake of the trilogy, they might as well include all the games, and I'd be fine with that. They could kink out some of the flaws that Pac-Man World 3 had, make it a little bit better, because the only problems I really encountered were there is some noticeable slowdown and it can get repetitive, but it's fun. It's a fun game, and it'd be nice to have the trilogy playable on an HD system, because it's been years since Pac-Man World. And I think nowadays, with pretty
I'm not.
much every game getting a remake, we only have
Mhm.
Pac-Man World, Banjo-Kazooie, and I believe some other series to be remade. Those are the ones I hear the most though that really need to be remade.
I'm not against the World 3 remake. I'm just saying I think it would make more sense to do a Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness paired with those other two games. Just because I think it was a little bit more well received than the other than Pac-Man World 3. I could be wrong though. Um, I'm not really sure. I personally, I would kind of prefer to have a Maze Madness remake in there. Just to have I mean, it wouldn't then be a World Trilogy remaster, but it would be kind of like the best hits of the 2000s for the Pac-Man series, if you get what I mean.
So maybe at that point it'd be cool to have a remake of or Namco Museum of the modern Pac-Man games. But I'm gonna
Oh,
stand
that would be
by
really cool.
that if they're gonna remake the Pac-Man World trilogy, they're gonna have all three games, and Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness could be its own thing. But kind of
You,
moving on
you know,
from what?
oh no, I was gonna say, I think you could be right about the Namco Museum thing with those games. I mean, that could, if they're not gonna do a remake, because I haven't heard anything about remakes, they could just re-release the games in a Namco Museum style format. I think you're onto something there.
That'd be nice to see. I would like to see remakes of the Pac-Man World games, but at the very least they could do something like that. But moving on from Pac-Man World, I think this about wraps it up because we went over our memories with the Pac-Man series, we went from the beginning, our memories with the games in the series, Namco Museum, Pac-Man World games, even Mario Kart, Pac-Man and Mario Kart, and then a few slight predictions, but they did do a few things for the 40th anniversary of Pac-Man. We know now that they have this Pac-Man World or Pac-Man Live thing that's on Twitch where you can create your own Pac-Man levels. I don't think that's the only
Right.
thing they're gonna do. And they also had, I predicted this, they were gonna do the One-Up Arcade thing, which is the 40th anniversary edition of Pac-Man, and it includes,
Right.
I think, Pac-Man, Pac-Man Plus, even Pac-Land. So that's pretty cool.
Oh,
But
I love
overall,
Pac-Land.
yeah, it's cool because it was a 2D platformer a year before Super Mario Brothers. Pretty
Yeah.
impressive.
Actually, before we wrap things up, should we mention the elephant in the room? You know, that thing that happened in 2013. I don't know if you remember it.
The
Square
Ghostly
Tongue.
Adventures. Yeah, I'm just gonna mention
Yeah.
it quickly, or just talk about it quickly. Yeah, it was a dumb design choice, but I don't think it ruined the series because no one really remembers it, and it wasn't even that bad. The design, yeah, it was bad, but I think Namco went back to the design that worked, the classic design, and that was really the extent of it, in my opinion. So I think we're past those days, and we could get something truly special for the 40th anniversary, and I have very fond
Let's
memories with the
see.
series.
Yeah, same here. Look. I hope we get a remake of one of the World games. I really do. I don't know if we will. I mean, Pac-Man's been kind of weird lately. The only new game we got was Championship Edition 2 Plus. So I don't know. Um, I hope Namco sees that the fans are craving, these types of games again, and maybe their development studios could get to work. I mean, we have a Mr. Driller remake coming out this summer. I mean, obviously they're listening to some sort of fan base. So I think it's inevitable that we get a remake of World.
But yeah, but anyways, we went over everything, our memories and or not vague predictions. I've been thinking of Paper Mario too much. Our
Oh
light
no.
predictions, not vague predictions, because it's clear as day what we predict to see, and just our fun memories with the series. And before we end this, happy birthday, Pac-Man! Thank you for all the memories. Thank you for all the good times, and thank you for what you did to gaming. I know you're not gonna hear
Yeah.
me because you're not real, but if anyone at Namco's listening to this, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Pac-Man. You've truly you've really made me love games in general and got me into the whole video game landscape in general. If it wasn't for you, I don't know if I'd be the gamer I am today. Same goes for Mario, but you're the one who got me into it the most.
Word.